It starts with a whisper, a vibration in your pocket, a message from a stranger, a ghost in the machine that seems friendly, a wrong number, a chance encounter on a dating app, a friend request from a beautiful face you don't quite recognize. It feels harmless. It feels like fate, but it is not. It is a hunt, and you are the prey. This is not a story about petty thieves or lone wolf hackers. This is the story of a global machine, a new kind of empire, built on an industrial scale. It's an empire of fraud factories and digital prisons, a criminal enterprise that has fused the cold, calculating efficiency of cybercrime with the brutal, soul-crushing violence of human trafficking. It generates tens of billions of dollars every year by creating two sets of victims in a single, horrific transaction. One victim will lose their life savings. The other will lose their soul. This is the story of the scam farms. And to understand this 21st century monster, we have to go back to the moment it was born, a moment when the entire world shut down and a perfect storm began to gather in the shadows. Before the world went quiet, the rhythm of transnational organized crime was different. For the powerful Chinese syndicates, the lifeblood of their empire was the physical world, the clatter of chips in the glitzy casinos of Cambodia, the high-stakes gambling junkets, the face-to-face enterprises that had made them rich and powerful. But then, the pandemic came. Lockdowns descended like a shroud. Borders slammed shut. The river of money that flowed through their casinos dried to a trickle, threatening their very existence. But these syndicates are not clumsy brutes. They are sophisticated corporate-style enterprises, masters of adaptation. They saw the crisis not as an end, but as an opportunity, a strategic pivot. As billions of people retreated into their homes, they were plunged into a new reality. A world lived almost entirely online. A world of isolation, of loneliness, of vulnerability. The syndicates saw a captive audience, a global population ripe for exploitation. At the same time, the economic devastation of the pandemic created another vast, desperate pool of people. Millions of educated, multilingual, and newly unemployed young men and women across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, all searching for a lifeline. The syndicates saw the two sides of a new, diabolical equation. On one side, a global market of lonely, isolated targets. On the other, a global workforce of the desperate and the hopeful. They possessed billions in capital, deep expertise in moving money through the world's dark financial alleys, and long-standing connections in regions where laws are merely suggestions. So, they reallocated their vast resources. They pivoted from the physical world of gambling to the digital world of fraud. They began to build something new, something monstrous. They began to build the fraud factories. But where could such an empire of crime lay its foundations? It needed a place where the law was weak, where corruption was a way of life, and where impunity could be bought. It found its perfect incubator in the Mekong sub-region of Southeast Asia. Countries like Cambodia, Laos, and especially the war-torn borderlands of Myanmar became ground zero. Here, in these geopolitical blind spots, a deliberate architecture of impunity was constructed. The syndicates didn't just bribe a few officials. They built their fortresses within special economic zones, or SEZCs, quasi-sovereign territories that operate with almost no government oversight. In places with names that would soon become synonymous with modern slavery, Sihanoukville and Poipet in Cambodia, the Golden Triangle, Essays in Laos, and the lawless towns of Laokai and Mayawadi in Myanmar, a terrifying alliance was forged. The syndicates brought billions in illicit investment, and in return, corrupt local elites, powerful military commanders, and complicit politicians provided a shield of protection, carving out crime havens where national and international laws were rendered utterly meaningless. This wasn't just passive corruption. It was active, state-level complicity. In Cambodia, investigators found that even when police conducted raids, they were often just for show, with the vast majority of operations remaining untouched. Known Chinese criminals, wanted for fraud back home, were reportedly granted Cambodian citizenship, effectively shielding them from justice. The criminal enterprise wasn't just hiding in the shadows of the state, it was becoming part of the state itself, creating a fortress of corruption almost impossible to breach. This new model was a quantum leap from the fraud of the past. The old scams, the telemarketing frauds, the infamous Nigerian prince emails, even the cartel-run call centers in Mexico were profitable, but they were disparate. The digital revolution provided the tools for something far grander: social media, encrypted messaging, and the ghost-like anonymity of cryptocurrency. The term fraud factory was coined in 2002 to describe this new beast, because it wasn't just defined by the scams, it was defined by its industrial scale and its complete fusion with human trafficking on a level never seen before. It was a self-contained forced labor criminal ecosystem, and it was ready to be unleashed upon the world. The engine of this dark machine runs on human fuel. Its workforce is not hired, it is hunted, sourced through a sophisticated global human trafficking network that operates in plain sight. The hunt begins online, on legitimate job portals, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Telegram. The bait is a lie polished to a perfect shine, a high-paying job in marketing, IT, or human resources in an exotic location like Thailand. The ads are carefully crafted to attract the best and the brightest, educated, ambitious, multilingual young people from dozens of countries, from Kenya to Brazil, India to Indonesia. Imagine you're that person. You've just graduated. Your future is uncertain. And then you see it, the perfect opportunity. The recruiters are professional. The offer's generous. This is your ticket to a better life. They arrange your flight to a regional hub, like Bangkok. A car is waiting for you. Everything seems legitimate. But then the car drives for hours, away from the city towards a remote, dusty border town. You are told you'll be crossing the border for a final interview or to complete paperwork. You are smuggled across a river in the dead of night and delivered to the gates of a sprawling, high-walled compound, topped with barbed wire and patrolled by armed guards. In that instant, the dream collapses into a nightmare. Your passport is seized, your phone is confiscated. You are forced to sign a predatory contract, placing you in a state of debt bondage. You now supposedly owe the syndicate an impossible sum for your own trafficking. You are no longer a professional, you are property. Life inside is what one survivor called a combination between a prison and a madhouse. You are forced to work 15, 16, even 17 hours a day, 7 days a week, in a vast, soulless office, surrounded by hundreds of others just like you, their faces illuminated by the pale glow of computer screens. Every keystroke is monitored, every conversation is recorded. You are given a script, a playbook. You are taught the art of psychological manipulation. Your job is now to perpetrate scams against the entire world. But this is not a choice. It is a state of forced criminality, where you are both a victim and a perpetrator. And failure is not an option. If you don't meet your impossibly high revenue quotas, the punishment is medieval. They beat you with steel rods. They electrocute you with cattle prods. They starve you for days in solitary confinement. For the women trapped inside, the horrors compounded by the constant threat of sexual violence and assault. If you resist, if you break, they threaten to sell you to another, even more brutal compound. They threaten to sell you into prostitution. Some survivors whisper of an even darker fate, being sold for forced organ harvesting. This isn't a small, isolated problem. The United Nations estimates that at this very moment, at least 120,000 people are trapped in these conditions in Myanmar, with another 100,000 held captive in Cambodia. An entire shadow army of slaves, trapped in digital prisons, forced to inflict financial ruin on the outside world in order to survive another day. And the most devastating weapon in their arsenal is a meticulously crafted scam, a masterpiece of psychological warfare known by a chillingly agricultural name: pig butchering. The name comes from the Chinese sha ju pan, an analogy for fattening a pig before taking it to the slaughter. It is the flagship product of the fraud factories, a cruel hybrid of a romance scam and an investment fraud that weaponizes the most fundamental human need, the need for connection, and turns it into a tool of financial annihilation. It begins with that simple, seemingly accidental message. You, the target, reply. The person on the other end, using a fake profile with stolen photos of an attractive, successful-looking individual, is charming, witty, and attentive. This is the first stage, fattening the pig. For weeks, sometimes months, the person trapped in the compound is forced to follow a script, meticulously building a deep emotional or romantic bond with you. They learn your hopes, your fears, your dreams. They share their own fabricated stories of triumph and vulnerability. They become your perfect partner, your trusted confidant, the first person you talk to in the morning and the last person you speak to at night. This grooming phase is a systematic demolition of your emotional defenses. Once your trust is absolute, the second stage begins, the lure. The scammer casually mentions an exclusive, can't-miss investment opportunity, usually involving cryptocurrency. They might show you screenshots of their own account, overflowing with profits, a vision of the lavish life you could build together. They offer to guide you, to share their secret. They direct you to a website or a mobile app that looks incredibly professional, a perfect clone of a legitimate trading platform. So perfect, in fact, that some have even made it onto the official Apple and Google app stores. They encourage you to start small, just to test the waters. And this is where the genius of the trap is revealed. The fake platform shows you incredible artificial gains. Your small investment doubles, then triples. Feels real. The dopamine hit is powerful. The trust you have in your new friends solidifies into absolute certainty. They were right. This is real. Now, the final stage begins, the slaughter. Encouraged by the scammer and the intoxicating illusion of success on your screen, you go all in. You invest more and more. You liquidate your retirement accounts. You sell your stocks. You take out second mortgages. You borrow from friends and family, pouring everything you have into the platform. The numbers on the screen climb to astronomical heights. Your future seems secure. Then you try to withdraw your money. The trap springs. Suddenly, there are problems. You are hit with demands for fabricated taxes, service fees, or withdrawal charges, anything to squeeze the last few drops of money from you. You pay, desperate to unlock your fortune. But the demands never stop. And then, one day, the website is gone. The app no longer works. The phone number is disconnected. The loving, supportive person who had become the center of your world vanishes without a trace. They never existed. And your money, all of it, is gone forever. This is the psychological core of the scam farm's business model. It preys on loneliness, on people experiencing a difficult life event, a divorce, a job loss, the death of a partner. The scammer fills that emotional void with surgical precision. The trauma it inflicts is therefore twofold. The catastrophic financial loss is compounded by a sense of profound emotional betrayal that is almost impossible to describe. Victims are left with overwhelming shame, humiliation, and self-blame, often made worse by a society that unfairly stigmatizes them. Many are too embarrassed to even tell their own families. The psychological fallout is a clinical nightmare. Severe depression, crippling anxiety, PTSD. And for some, a permanent inability to ever trust another human being again. Law enforcement officials describe it as a crushing, overwhelming, psychological smack in the face. And in the most tragic cases, this unbearable weight has driven victims to suicide. And what of the person on the other end of the line? The trafficked worker, the slave forced to carry out this psychological demolition? They exist in that hellish space of forced criminality, simultaneously a victim of horrific abuse and the perpetrator of it. They endure the daily trauma of their captivity, the beatings, the threats, the violence. But they also carry the complex burden of the harm they are forced to inflict. The system is designed to break them, to strip away their humanity, to turn their own trauma into a weapon. It creates a cascading chain of trauma that powers the entire enterprise, where one group of victims is tortured into becoming the perfect instrument for creating another. While pig butchering is the most profitable scam, the factories are versatile. They also run more traditional schemes on an industrial scale. Armies of workers are forced out to run tech support and impersonation scams, making thousands of calls a day. They pose as employees from Microsoft or your bank, using alarming pop-up windows or urgent text messages to convince you your computer has a virus or your account has been compromised. Their goal? is to create panic, to trick you into paying for useless services with gift cards or crypto, or worse, to grant them remote access to your computer, where they can steal every piece of sensitive data you have. They also operate classic Ponzi and pyramid schemes, promising impossibly high, risk-free returns to lure investors into fraudulent platforms that are designed to inevitably collapse, wiping out everyone involved. But these compounds, these digital dungeons, are just the production floors of the operation. They are the most visible part of a much larger, more sophisticated global ecosystem. To truly understand the enemy, we have to zoom out and map the architecture of the criminal syndicates at the helm, the financial wizards who launder their billions, and the terrifying globalization of their business model. At the top of this pyramid are not common street gangs, but powerful, highly organized Chinese transnational criminal syndicates. These are sprawling enterprises with corporate-style hierarchies, a strategic long-term vision, and a chillingly effective business model. And they are evolving. They are moving beyond simply committing the crimes themselves and into a far more dangerous model, what experts call crime as a service. Think of it like this. They are building the entire criminal infrastructure, the fortified compounds, the secure communication platforms, and the army of trafficked workers, the complex money laundering networks, and then renting out access to other criminal groups. By moving up the value chain from being the producers of crime to being the enablers and gatekeepers of it, they make their business more resilient and diversified. They can profit from any illicit activity that uses their platforms, consolidating their power over the entire global criminal underworld. The lifeblood that keeps this entire global enterprise alive is money. Tens of billions of dollars a year that needs to be washed, moved, and hidden from the eyes of the law. The syndicate's financial strategy is a masterclass in exploiting the cracks in the global financial system. Their primary tool is cryptocurrency. Its speed, its global reach, and its perceived anonymity make it the perfect vehicle for moving vast fortunes in an instant, obscuring their criminal origins. Victims are instructed to buy Bitcoin or Ethereum on legitimate exchanges, then transfer it to a wallet controlled by the syndicate, where it vanishes into the labyrinth of the blockchain. But they also use older, more traditional methods. The physical casinos, co-located with the scam compounds, provide a ready-made infrastructure for laundering money, mixing illicit fraud profits with seemingly legitimate gambling revenue. They make extensive use out of informal, trust-based underground banking systems that operate completely outside the formal financial sector, allowing them to move fortunes across borders with no digital trail. And they use front companies, legitimate-looking import-export businesses that can disguise the proceeds of crime as normal commercial payments by faking invoices and creating phantom shipments of goods. A critical link in this financial chain is a figure you may have heard of: the money mule. These are individuals recruited to receive and transfer stolen funds, adding layers of separation between the criminals and the crime. But not all mules are the same. Some are unwitting, often victims of romance or job scams themselves, who are tricked into using their personal bank accounts to move money, believing they are helping a lover or performing a legitimate job duty. Others are witting, individuals who may have started as unwitting but choose to ignore the red flags, blinded by the promise of easy money. And finally, there are the complicit mules, who are fully integrated into the criminal conspiracy, operating networks of funnel accounts and recruiting other mules, acting as the professional foot soldiers of the financial operation. Understanding this hierarchy is critical for law enforcement to distinguish between the exploited and the exploiters. For a time, this empire seemed untouchable, concentrated in its protected enclaves in Southeast Asia. But no empire stands still, as international law enforcement, particularly from China, began to ramp up the pressure. The syndicates did what any smart multinational corporation would do when faced with risk. They diversified. They began to export the scam farm model around the globe, creating operational redundancy to ensure that a crackdown in one country wouldn't threaten their entire business. Interpol has sounded the alarm, documenting the emergence of new scam centers and human trafficking routes far beyond Asia. West Africa is being groomed as a potential new regional hub. Operations have been identified in the Middle East and, shockingly, as far away as Latin America. where Malaysian victims were discovered trafficked into a compound in Peru. This is a calculated global expansion. The crisis born in the Mekong has unequivocally become a global threat, with victims trafficked from at least 66 different countries, and criminal facilitators now being recruited from South America and Africa to manage the new franchises. The sheer scale and brutality of this epidemic eventually forced the world to wake up. The international community, though slow to react, began to fight back. But how do you fight a borderless enemy that lives in the shadows of the internet and is protected by corrupt states? The global response has been a story of frustrating challenges and hard-won victories. A high-stakes battle waged by law enforcement on the front lines and by lawmakers trying to rewrite the rules of the digital age. The fight back began with a series of unprecedented international enforcement actions. Recognizing that no single nation could defeat this hydra-headed monster alone, cooperation became the key. In 2023, Interpol launched Operation Stormmakers 2, a landmark initiative mobilizing police in 27 countries. It was one of the first global operations to specifically target the nexus between cyber fraud and human trafficking. The 5-month operation resulted in hundreds of arrests and the rescue of 149 trafficking victims. But more importantly, it provided an incontrovertible proof of the crime's globalization, connecting the dots between syndicates in Asia and operations as far away as Latin America. China, whose citizens made up a vast number of both the trapped workers and the financial victims, launched its own aggressive crackdown called Operation 127. Exerting immense diplomatic and military pressure, and even forming alliances with ethnic armed groups in Myanmar, China declared war on the scam syndicates operating on its border. The operation was stunningly successful in the Kokang region, dismantling numerous compounds and leading to the repatriation of over 40,000 people. Joint raids between countries, like one between Australia and the Philippines that shut down a major compound in Manila, showed that bilateral partnerships could yield dramatic results. But for every compound raided, dozens more remained operational. These victories, while important, felt like cutting heads off a hydra. The core of the problem remained the immense difficulty of cross-border prosecution. The very nature of the crime creates a legal and jurisdictional nightmare. The scammers in Cambodia, the trafficked workers from Kenya, the financial victim is in Ohio, and the stolen money is routed through a crypto exchange in the Cayman Islands. Which country has the right to prosecute? This legal chaos is the criminal's greatest shield. Gathering digital evidence that can stand up in court is a Herculean task. Data might be stored on servers in half a dozen different countries, each with its own privacy laws. Getting access requires formal government-to-government requests through mutual legal assistance treaties, a process so notoriously slow and bureaucratic that investigations can be stalled for years. Even if a perpetrator is identified, extraditing them from a country that offers them protection is often impossible. This creates a climate of near total impunity, where the masterminds know the odds of them ever seeing the inside of a Western courtroom are practically zero. Faced with these frustrating limitations, a strategic pivot began to happen in the halls of government. Lawmakers realized that chasing individual scammers was not enough. They had to change the entire environment in which they operated. A new wave of legislation began to sweep across the globe, founded on a revolutionary idea: shared responsibility. The logic was simple. These criminal empires could not exist without the infrastructure provided by legitimate private sector companies. The banks that move the money, the telecom companies that provide the phone lines, and the social media platforms where the scams begin. For years, these corporations had operated behind a shield of liability, arguing they were just neutral platforms. But with financial losses from fraud soaring into the tens of billions of dollars annually, governments decided that era was over. Countries like Singapore, Thailand, and Australia began rolling out new, muscular legal frameworks. Singapore's shared responsibility framework now holds financial institutions financially liable for scam losses if they fail to implement required security measures. Thailand's new decrees give police the power to freeze suspicious transactions and hold businesses liable for damages. Australia is proposing a unified framework that imposes a clear duty of care on banks, telcos, and social media giants to protect their customers from scams. This represents a fundamental rewriting of the rules of the digital age, piercing the liability shields and forcing the private sector to move from a passive to an active role in fraud prevention. But even as the world scrambles to build these new defenses, the enemy is already evolving. The criminal syndicates, early and enthusiastic adopters of any new technology, are looking to the next frontier. They are about to unleash a new generation of scams, powered by a technology that will make everything we've seen so far look like child's play. The future of fraud is here, and it will be powered by artificial intelligence. The integration of AI into the scam farm playbook is not a distant threat. It is happening right now. For the syndicates, it is the ultimate force multiplier, set to automate and enhance every single stage of their criminal process. AI-driven language models can already generate perfectly fluent, grammatically flawless, and highly personalized scam messages and phishing emails at an industrial scale, eliminating the clumsy mistakes that used to be a red flag. AI can craft more convincing fake job ads to lure a wider net of trafficking victims. AI-powered bots can automate attacks, testing stolen passwords across thousands of websites in seconds, and can create vast networks of hyper-realistic fake social media profiles to build a convincing backstory for a scammer in an instant. But the most terrifying development, the true quantum leap in the power of deception, is the weaponization of deepfake technology. This is AI that can create audio and video so realistic it is virtually indistinguishable from reality, capable of shattering the very methods we use to verify trust. Voice cloning is the first wave. Scammers need only a few seconds of a person's voice, scraped from a social media video or a voicemail, to create a perfect digital replica. Imagine getting a frantic phone call. The voice on the other end is your child, your parent, your spouse. It is their voice, filled with panic, begging for money to get them out of a terrible situation, a car accident, a kidnapping. Your instinct is to act, to help. But it's not them, it's a machine, it's a deep fake. The next step is video impersonation. A key defense against a romance scammer has always been to ask for a live video call. Deepfake technology renders that defense obsolete. The scammer can now appear on your screen, their face and voice a perfect real-time imitation of the person in the stolen photos they've been using, adding a devastating layer of authenticity to the lie. In the corporate world, a CFO might receive a video call from their CEO, ordering an urgent wire transfer. But it's not their CEO. It's a deepfake, executing a multi-million-dollar heist. This technology threatens to unleash what some experts are calling a trust apocalypse. In a world where you can no longer trust your own ears or your own eyes, where a voice call from a loved one or a video conference with a colleague could be a sophisticated illusion. The fundamental chains of trust that hold our digital society together begin to corrode and break. The long-term consequence is a severe, perhaps irreversible, erosion of faith in digital communication itself. A systemic threat to the global economy and our social fabric that far exceeds the financial loss of any single scam. The scam farm model, with its immense profitability and adaptability, is here to stay. The long-term consequence is a severe, perhaps irreversible, erosion of faith in digital communication itself. The syndicates will continue their global expansion, constantly seeking out new havens in regions with weak governance, forever staying one step ahead of the law. So what is the way forward? How do we fight an enemy that can be anyone, anywhere, and that is armed with the power to perfectly mimic reality itself? Combating this crisis requires a paradigm shift. It requires moving away from simply reacting and toward a proactive, unified, and systemic approach that treats this not as a series of individual crimes, but as a global security threat. It requires a grand alliance between governments, law enforcement, the private sector, and all of us. Governments must work to harmonize international laws to close the jurisdictional loopholes that criminals exploit. They must use targeted financial and diplomatic sanctions to punish the individuals and corrupt officials who protect these compounds. Law enforcement must create permanent, multi-agency task forces that can move as fluidly across borders as the criminals do. They must double down on the oldest rule in the book: follow the money. Targeting the money laundering infrastructure is the most effective way to cripple the entire criminal business model. The private sector, the banks, the tech giants, the crypto exchanges, must fully embrace their shared responsibility. They must foster radical, cross-industry collaboration, sharing threat intelligence in real time, so that a scammer blocked on one platform is instantly flagged on all others. They must build their products with safety and security as a core feature, not a costly afterthought. And finally, for us, the public. We must be educated through sustained awareness campaigns about these new technological threats. And we must build a system of robust, trauma-informed support for the victims at both ends of this horrific chain, for the people who have lost their savings, and for the survivors who have been rescued from the hell of the compounds, both of whom need access to mental health care, financial counseling, and legal aid to begin to rebuild their shattered lives. The war against the fraud factories is a war for the future of digital trust. It is a battle against an enemy that has turned our deepest human instincts into weapons and is now on the verge of acquiring the power to warp reality itself. It is a fight that we cannot afford to lose. We hope you have enjoyed this deep dive. Stay safe and vigilant, and give us a like, follow, and share. Until next time, your team at AML and the Fraud History Channel.